Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the HR and Payroll 2.0 podcast. I'm Pete Tiliakis, and as always, I'm joined by the legendary Julie Fernandez. Welcome, Julie.
Thanks so much, Pete. I think we're going to head into a really interesting area for both of us to learn more about. So why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest?
Yes. I'm really excited to have Nicole Forbes. She's the Deputy General Counsel at GP, Globalization Partners, for those that don't know GP. So welcome, Nicole. I'm really excited to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Pete and Julie. I'm really excited to be here, and this is definitely an interesting topic and lots to talk about here.
Yeah. We want to talk about the H1B. Some are calling it a talent tariff, is what I saw today in an article. I thought, well, that's okay. That's an interesting way to call it. So, yeah, we want to dig into this and try to help people understand what it means for their talent strategies and their businesses, because I think there's going to be an impact to certain sectors more so than others. And business cases, Julie, we know that those are probably getting blown up right now with this. So yeah, I got a lot we can share, but do you want to do the honors?
Yeah, why don't we start with just learning a little bit more about you, Nicole? I think you found your way into employment law space, which is, arguably right there with HR. So how did you make your way into that field? And do you consider yourself HR? Are you close enough to HR to be an HR kindred spirit? Or tell us a little bit about how you got here.
I definitely consider myself an HR kindred spirit, and if not directly HR, I'm certainly HR adjacent, being an employment lawyer. So I have been a lawyer for, almost coming up on 20 years now. So I initially sort of clerked for the courts for a while, and then in my first private practice job, I kind of fell into employment law and just really loved it. I found it sort of fascinating, and you've got, so much of a people aspect to it as well. And it just requires so much critical thinking and creative problem solving. So I practiced privately for quite a number of years. And then I joined Globalization Partners just about a decade ago. And that really brought me into the foray of international employment law and HR, which then is just a whole other ballgame there, and is really fascinating. And I had the fortunate opportunity to join GP as one of the early employees. So I was employee number 15. I was the second lawyer at the company. And so I've really had a chance to sort of build and scale GP. And now I run our Global Employment Counsel and Compliance team. So we are hand in hand with all of our HR folks, HR operations. So definitely consider myself in the HR world. And that's kind of, how I came into it.
You know what I think is really cool about that and the way that you've made your way in is before there were HR degrees, and there's still not a lot of them, employment law was one of the only ways that a person with talent in the employment space would show up, right? And
Exactly.
I've even seen at different size organizations, especially maybe in the mid-size space, I often see the general counsel or whoever is in charge of all of the legal activity owning HR as well because of that critical mix with employment law. So
yeah, that's a very common structure, I think, in companies, is having the general counsels have HR fall underneath it. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Before there were degrees on that, you saw a lot of employment lawyers.
It's funny that you say that. I have a bachelor's degree in business management, but it's I guess a concentration in HR management, and that's probably where I got all the law classes that I got was employment law and labor law. But I actually got really cozy with that world at Disney, dealing with all the Hollywood unions. I had to stay very close with our employment lawyers, and there was like a bunch. It's not just, it's like an army of them. And yeah, they were always, right over my shoulder kind of helping me with things. But
our VP of HR and myself are constantly on calls.
Yeah. Yeah, they had them aligned into HR as well. And it was, or maybe they even reported there somehow, but very closely woven in is my point. And I think that was purposeful. And obviously now with the compliance sort of, when you were talking about your team, I was like, are you guys like, do you like stay, is there like a 24-hour watch where people are monitoring the compliance bombardment that's coming in?
I mean, there should be. I mean, that's why you really need a
Yeah.
global team because,
Yeah.
I wake up and I'm waking up to EMEA folks and EMEA matters and issues. And then as we get into the day, I start to hit US, Latin
Yeah.
America, West Coast. And then as it closes for the East Coast time, APAC starts to wake up and you get into that. So you really, to stay on
Yeah.
top of it, you absolutely need a
Yeah.
global team.
I just have little alerts on my, whatever simple Google and I've even tried to do some of them now in ChatGPT to surface certain news to me. Like Julie, right? There's a lot that goes on in this industry that we don't even sometimes get to notice right away. And there's one every day, whether it's Asia Pac or Africa or Europe, it's like, or America, there's like another thing. And it's got to be, I know it has to be intense for teams that are out there. So anyway, look, I want to get into this H1B thing because this has become super angsty, obviously a bit controversial in the news, but like, let's just kind of cut to it. Like what has happened with the H1B change? What is the talent tariff, if you will, air quotes? And what does it mean like for the working world right now in terms of skilled talent importing, I guess you could call it?
Yeah. So maybe it makes sense to just start of
Yeah.
like what is an H1B visa.
Exactly. I was going to say that would help. That would help.
Yeah, just to frame it. So it's a non-immigrant visa classification that allows U.S. employers to temporarily employ workers to perform services in a specialty occupation. It requires at least a bachelor's degree. And you need to sort of demonstrate that the worker has special, skills and knowledge to fall into these specialty occupations. It's one of the most well-known and highly sought-after work visas, particularly in the technology and engineering fields. And so what has happened is there's sort of three changes. The most talked about change is this $100,000 fee for new petitions. That's sort of the tariff talent,
And
as you framed it.
Per
Yeah.
petition, right? That's
Per petition.
person.
Yes,
But
exactly.
it used to be only maybe 5,000 or two to 5,000, something like that.
Yeah, it ranged in
Yeah.
between 2,000 to 5,000 for those sort of core government fees, and it kind of depended on the
Yeah.
size of the company and the nature of the application. So this is a huge jump that has really disrupted the
Am I
entire
correct
process.
that there used to be like only so many? Like I don't think there was an infinite number. There was like so many for the year and that was it.
Yeah, there is a statutory cap on them. So
Mhm.
that's 85,000. And so 65,000 are really for sort of all visa categories. And then there's what's known as a master's cap, and that holds 20,000 visas. And those are reserved for beneficiaries who have a U.S. master's degree or higher. So that's how you get to that total 85,000. So really, and it's a lottery system. And so really your
Oh, wow.
chances are 30, maybe 40% of getting the visa. So it's not even a sort of done deal or, just a given that you'll get the H1B visa. In and
Yeah.
of itself, it's a very uncertain process.
Interesting. Julie, have you ever had to scope this onto a project? You've done so much offshoring, onshoring, nearshoring.
Not often. And I don't know, Nicole, you'll tell us, is that because, new ones versus, a maintenance level or kind of like an existing level of activity, how much net new stuff is going on? But I really haven't seen lots of business cases delve down into the level of what category of
Yeah.
worker. It works instead with, like certainly the professional class or the salary ranges and levels of folks that would be your H1B visas, but not specifically
Yeah.
historically including costs, because I think they were de minimis, right? And at this point in time, like the game's on.
Now it's cost prohibitive, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the vendor, because I used to work for TCS, right? And obviously we're an Indian company. I think 70% I heard of H1Bs come from India, talent and resources. And a lot of the H1Bs were folks that were there working on major projects. But we use this very strategically once at Disney. We had and shout out to Manuel Gonzalez, my buddy. He's still there at Disney. We brought in Manuel because he was such an exceptional talent for finance, SAP finance, and the complexity we were dealing with. We just could not find the skill for what they needed. And they actually did an H1B to get that skill set. I think he was from Monterrey, Mexico. And they brought him in and did that. And he ultimately became a citizen and all that. But companies that are using this at scale, Nicole, like what's the situation now for them? Like, this has got to blow up their talent model and their cost model and all of their, and maybe the risk to whether or not their projects can get completed if they can't get one, or what does this mean?
I mean, it completely, I would say, blows up sort of that model. If you rely on a high number of H1B visas to sort of as a talent strategy, and so employers now are really going to have to think strategically about implementing and explore alternative sort of adoption strategies to secure the talent that they need. I mean, the interesting thing about the 100,000 fee is that so that's been in effect since September 25th, I think. But the government actually still hasn't determined or published a mechanism for the employer to pay the fee. So we're in this weird space of like the rule is legally in effect, but the practical collection of the fee has been stalled. So we're just everyone's just sort of paused and waiting. And so this doesn't apply to, renewals or anything like that. It's only new applications. And there's some lack of clarity in terms of whether a change of employer would be considered a new petition or not. There also is a lot of uncertainty around, the F1 visas transition to an H1B, and the F1 visas are the international students here at universities as well. And an additional sort of proposed change, and this is sort of what I would call sort of the bucket number 2 of changes. This one isn't actually implemented yet, but it's going to change the lottery system that currently operates, which is a totally random lottery system.
Sure it is.
Exactly. And move it to a weighted system based on wage. So you probably heard Julie mention these sort of prevailing wages. So every H1B, you're required as an employer to pay that employee what's known as the prevailing wage, which is the wage set by the Department of Labor based on your job, role, responsibilities, and also location. And those range from level 1, which are the lower, more entry level, up to level 4.
Yeah.
And so the proposal is to create a weighted system where essentially for those wage level 4 registrations, you get 4 entries for that role. Wage level 3, you get 3 entries. All the way down to 1, you get 1 entry. And that was really intended to prioritize the highly skilled, higher paid workers and discourage the use of the H1B program for lower wage or entry level, those kinds of things. So again, that hasn't been implemented yet. It still has to go through the whole Administrative Procedure Act requirements of comment notice, those kinds of things. But that is one of the proposed changes. And then the third bucket of what I'll sort of say is in the changes area, although it's not really a change that impacts process or requirement. But the DOL has announced a sort of enforcement initiative around H1Bs called Project Firewall. And it really signals a much more aggressive posture from the government on compliance, including increased direct investigations, audits, site visits to H1B employers to ensure compliance. And that's was implemented to sort of safeguard the rights of wages of U.S. workers. That's kind of like almost the enforcement mechanism of what I think the changes around the H1B visa are intended to accomplish.
Yeah. Which sounds like that's a good thing, right? But I wonder if we're going to stifle innovation or maybe stall something. I just hope we're not sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You know what I mean?
Nicole, one of the things that I can see in the lottery reform, right, where the wage levels are getting more entries, you mentioned that that it's based on the job range and location. And one thing I think many folks don't think about is that compensation strategies don't, they might have a job range. Some of them might not even be that sophisticated, but do they really have a job range by location? Not all employers have their compensation strategy stratified so that there's even a location component to it. They don't know,
Well, exactly.
transparency
reminds me of construction payroll, like the prevailing wages and sort of, job costing by, where they are and all that sort of thing. Like that kind of sounds the same certified
I
payroll.
think with some of the new pay equity and more the pay disclosure laws across the
Yeah.
U.S., employers to just keep it simple, particularly if they're recruiting in all states, they're like, you know what, we're just going to post the salary range for all positions, and the salary range is going to be the salary range, no matter where you're located. And
Interesting.
so I think you see a lot of companies in the U.S. taking that approach. So you're exactly right,
Yeah.
Julie. Then almost the location aspect kind of goes out the window, but I think the DOL still takes it into consideration
Yeah.
because they're the ones then making that wage determination.
So just coming back to the H1B, obviously more has changed than just this fee, right? It's not just about the fee, it sounds like.
I mean, the fee is the aspect of the changes that's gone into effect currently, and that's definitely the thing that's most talked about right now.
Yeah. Are the other changes, like, is this permanent right now, or is this some sort of temporary thing and we'll wait and see what becomes permanent? Or is this it? This is what we're going to be living with for a while?
Definitely not permanent.
Yeah. I'm sure there's fighting going on, right?
Oh,
It's
yes.
lawsuits.
And this is where it turns into now a legal podcast. But there's going to be lots of litigation, frankly, and a lot of uncertainty for a long time. There's already been a federal lawsuit that's been filed challenging that $100,000 fee in the Northern District of California, and they are seeking an immediate injunction to stop the fees enforcement. And they get into a number of arguments, including that the fee is actually an illegal tax that violates the Constitution because the president doesn't have the authority to unilaterally impose a fee or tax to generate revenue. And then the second one is the violation of the Administrative Procedures Act because it didn't go through that notice and comment period.
Is that because this was an executive order?
Yes, the proclamation.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Which isn't exactly law, I believe, right?
So that's an interesting question because presidential proclamations can have the effect of law so long as it is on a topic and issue that is within the presidential powers.
Okay.
And so that's where you're going to see a lot of, I think, tension in terms of, these two broad concepts of, strong procedure requirements versus sort of broad deference given to the president on immigration matters. But, legal scholars and immigration attorneys really widely believe that, the plaintiffs have a strong basis for being successful in their injunction to stop the fee from being implemented. But it's widely expected that if that happens, then it will be appealed, potentially up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and to the Supreme Court. So even if it's successful on the first phase, we know it's going to be challenged a long time. And it's likely that there's going to be more and more lawsuits of this being filed as we go. The current lawsuit right now was brought by a coalition of labor unions, employers, including sort of healthcare providers and nonprofits, some educational organizations. Interestingly, that lawsuit does not include sort of any tech firms. And so it'll be interesting to see whether
I was wondering that.
Yeah, whether you do sort of see some tech coalitions bringing some lawsuits as well. I think, you're probably not going to see a lawsuit filed by, like the Amazons, the Metas, those really large ones, because frankly, they can foot the bill for the new fee, and they can sort of absorb that. Those companies may have different items in front of this administration, and they don't really want to sort of dip a toe in where there's potential retaliation. So they may just sort of let it play out themselves.
You could end up getting some arguments about just even the access to H1B visa talent because of the prohibitive cost, right? For smaller firms or for folks that are random users. And I'm just thinking about the fact that you said there's no mechanism right now for paying the fee. And I'm thinking we're going to hit a fiscal year end, right? And now finance and accounting is going to be like, how do we account for this?
Yeah.
I mean,
get a bill.
Arguably are companies that are ready to pay that big check, but they have nowhere to send that big check. And so it's all a big mess. But a lot of the criticism of the new rules, particularly the fee aspect, is that it really is going to stifle innovation and lead to a loss of U.S. competitiveness and ultimately harm the U.S. economy because, if you're restricting the flow of highly skilled workers, the talent is going to go elsewhere.
Yeah.
And so they'll go to competing countries, Canada, UK, elsewhere. And then you see sort of that investment into the US economy and our overall competitiveness start to drop as
Yeah.
well. And, critics really cite to a lot of data that really establishes that H1B workers are really complements to the US workforce. They're not
Yeah.
replacements. And so they are filling these critical skills gap in our sort of
Yeah.
talent pool here in the US. And, when companies are successful here and they're able to hire H1B talent, they grow, they expand their operations, and ultimately then they do create additional jobs as
Yeah.
well. And so if you make it cost prohibitive, you're going to see a lot of companies, offshoring certain jobs. And
Yeah, I was
Agreed.
just going to say the workarounds then, right? Like that becomes a whole strategy around nearshoring, offshoring, remote and, like, okay, so I want this person. I need this talent.
Yep.
How am I going to figure out a way to make it happen? Do I have to hire them from somewhere else? Do I have to, in my organization?
I think we're going to
Yeah.
see more nearshoring. I mean, we already were seeing that, as it were, with canals closing and various different things going on in the world that started to pull more imports coming from Mexico for the first time. I think last year it was. So I'm wondering if maybe there'll be more of that going on, because I've seen some vendors around the HR tech space going down to, say, Colombia and some other places to get talent and build centers and do things. So
Mhm.
maybe we could
And
see
there's a
more
lot
of
of
that.
great talent there. I think
Yeah,
you probably will see that
yeah,
increase, definitely. And I think you'll see a good alternative for companies and employers to look at is employers of record, like
yeah,
like GP, because if you can't bring workers to the US, you can employ them where they're located.
yeah.
And with an EOR, then you don't have to set up that local legal entity,
It's
pay
a
for the
great point.
lawyers, the accountants, all of that to set it up, operationalize it, figure out how to do HR in another
Pay the
country.
tariff.
You pay the tariff.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's a great point. The vehicle of EOR does create that agility. I've always called it an agility
Yeah.
lever, to be able to address those sort of things.
But I want to ask, like, is it usually is the type of talent that's an H1B, higher visa
Mhm.
opportunity, is that the same type of talent that the EORs typically work with, or is it a different class of talent? And maybe
Yeah,
the more
it's all
exceptional
kinds.
roles or one-offs or the hard to finds, right, type of thing that's not been typical of EORs.
I mean, you really see EOR supporting all kinds of
Yeah,
workers, but they do tend to support actually more of the highly skilled, the what you would call in sort of the traditional white collar type spaces in that, because oftentimes companies are using EORs to expand into a market
yeah.
quickly, easily, just a few folks on the ground. And so you've got those really skilled local folks, highly skilled folks with specialized knowledge that companies are trying to hire overseas.
Yeah, that's what I mean,
So
Julie, gotta
it
imagine
does complement that same workforce, I think.
the premium
Yeah.
too that you're paying for this, right? It's gonna be an investment. It's a strategic sort of move, and every customer that I've studied deeply has been that case, and they've all been sort of white collar tech, biotech, biopharm, all kinds of crazy stuff, mobile
I
technology
know
companies.
sales quite a bit, but
Sometimes.
is that visa fee typically included in the EOR services? I mean, like, is that something that shifts, like before the
Yeah,
EORs would charge and inevitably pass along that fee, and
depends
so
on
it
the
really
country.
sits on the EOR
Yeah, it
side?
really depends on the country
Yeah,
and what the visa fees are. I mean, the majority of cases for EOR, you're hiring local nationals in that country,
Yeah.
so there's not really a visa aspect to the EOR service. But in cases where you do need to support a visa, and EORs do support visas, it really depends on the visa fees
Yeah.
per country. But I can tell you that no other country comes anywhere near $100,000. So
Sure.
yeah. What happens to people who are maybe already on an H1B that might be expiring, or are there people sort of in limbo right now
yes, there's
in
a
some way?
lot of people in limbo, and it's caused a lot of stress and anxiety
Yeah.
for these workers. So if you've got an H1B right now, you're good. You're fine.
Yeah.
Nothing needs to change. And if you stay in that job, a renewal with the same employer certainly isn't impacted by the new rule. But there is a little bit of uncertainty about whether a change in employer would be considered a new petition. I think there's the hope that it wouldn't be considered a new petition, and the $100,000 wouldn't apply.
Yeah.
One, I think because you see the proclamation targeted at entry from abroad, and one could make an argument that these H1B workers are already in the U.S., and so it's not an entry issue. It's simply a change in employer and a change of status rather than a new petition. But because there's so much lack of clarity, you just don't know how the administration or the agencies are going to interpret that. So there's a real fear and uncertainty for these workers, and there's the critics also really fear that because of that and the lack of stability, that you're going to get, like, the H1B workers are going to find somewhere else to locate and bring that knowledge and bring their sort of skills and experience elsewhere outside of the US. And there's also a lot of discussion on the impact of that on the F1 visas, those international students. So, for these graduate students, this really changed overnight for them. And again, on that aspect, there is also a ton of uncertainty about whether a transition from an F1 visa to an H1B would be considered a new petition and thus subject to the $100,000 fee.
Yeah.
Some folks argue that it wouldn't be, especially if they're in the U.S. and they remain in the U.S. throughout the entire process, because again, there's no new entry or entry from abroad. But I think there's a really high probability that it is determined to be a new petition and subject to a $100,000 fee, because technically under the form, it's a new petition. And so if you're a student, like, I know a lot of these students and universities are panicking right now because it'll likely result in less international students coming to universities, and then less investment in the universities to, develop and research technologies, biotech, all of those sort of important services and skills that we see invested into the university system here. And after you graduate, you've got 60 days before you can before you need to get new visa status.
So they got a lot of hoops to jump through.
Can you continue your education? So
you can continue
prolonging. I can see folks prolonging that, just like I can see employees who are fearful of changing to a different employer feeling just very captive or held hostage because of the fear of how it could impact, or maybe even employers individually will decide how they view this until the law is settled, right?
Exactly. You could be stuck somewhere that you really don't want to be stuck in.
Have you guys seen sort of an increase in employers coming to you saying, "Hey, could you help us deal with this?"
That's a great
question. How would this work if I had, say, some H1B needs and I wanted to use EOR to sort of address that? How would that work if they're coming here? Or I want to employ them here.
An EOR wouldn't necessarily help in that scenario if you still wanted them to come here, because even an EOR, if they're sponsoring the visa, will have to pay for that new fee, that new $100,000 fee. But where an EOR would come in handy is if you as a company, sort of said, we've got this strategy of, bringing a bunch of employees from India or somewhere else over to the US. And we actually have identified some of those folks. And now all of a sudden to bring 5 over is an additional $500,000. And EOR could say, hang on, like, what if you just employed them there in India through an EOR?
Reverse.
Then you don't have to set up an entity there and do all of that type of work. But that's really where an EOR
so
can be helpful.
you essentially would be able to access that talent offshore, but for your direct use. Okay, I see.
I'm curious how many, if you've ever seen any stats on how many of the H1B visa types of workers are remote workers. Because if you're talking about research and engineering and tech, like there's certain things that you probably can do remote just fine. And there are other things where you're trying to be incorporated into an R&D center, or things that are being brought on shore.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I don't know if they report on actual work location in terms of in terms of H1B. I mean, they do look at, so I think in the 2024 data, you see like almost 50% of the granted visas within the professional, scientific, and tech services type industry. And then within the job category, I think you see like, I think it said 64% were in computer related occupations. But yeah, what if those,
Yeah.
what if you're a company and with most of your folks in California and you've got someone in New York working remotely, arguably they could work remotely back in their home country.
Yeah, there's so many dimensions to that also, just if the administration and the country as a whole is bringing more manufacturing back, to our shores, then what if talent, what if it's difficult to bring the talent that you need to establish that presence isn't readily available here and gets subject not only to the tariffs, but to the whole lottery system to enable you to bring your stuff back on shore, right?
And exactly, that's what a lot of the sort of critics are highlighting, is that really the H1B program, again, like fills gaps in the US talent pool. And so, if you really do need these workers from other locations to come here and now you can't access them because it's cost prohibitive, it's just, I think it puts companies in a tough position.
Yeah.
And the fear is that ultimately then you see investment and opportunities going offshore, which is going to hurt American workers in the long run.
What would you say to sort of HR leaders or even business leaders that are kind of, I mean, like 2026 is on the horizon. Everybody's probably planning for, what they're doing next. Like, what would you say to mitigate risk and kind of navigate this, so to speak, just with a little bit of uncertainty going into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think companies are really going to need to be first proactive in terms of like reevaluating their strategy if they're using a large number of H1B workers. Like I said earlier, the really large companies are going to be able to shoulder this burden, but startups, small to mid-sized businesses, nonprofits, hospitals, universities, they're not going to be able to shoulder that burden. And so I think employers really need to sort of really reassess if they're needing H1B visas, that the need for that, and start thinking about alternative strategies because of the uncertainty. Because maybe this injunction is granted and you can submit an application and it doesn't require a fee, but some of these things can just change so quickly. And so because it's uncertain, I really think you need to start thinking about alternative strategies in terms of your workforce, and really the most practical solution then is you're looking at a more globally dispersed workforce.
Yeah, I think so. Go to where the talent is.
Are there exemptions that exist to some of this? I thought that I'd heard, or just the way that you classify or categorize, your occupations or things that folks are looking at to kind of navigate a little bit around some of the rules that as they get flushed out.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, maybe some of these rules may never get flushed out. Maybe we remain in this period of uncertainty.
Our national interest to do something, right?
Yeah, I mean that is one of the exemptions, is the sort of national interest exemption, and so employers can make an argument. So if you find that you really do, if you have a hire from abroad that's absolutely critical, you should start thinking about preparing detailed documentation to argue that the hire is in the U.S. national interest. And that doesn't have to just be national security type positions. It can be, it's broader than that. It's more like national interest rather than national security. So it could be specialized medical, critical infrastructure, those kinds of roles. So the proclamation does allow for those exemptions. But again, the process for that, what's going to be needed, who knows at this point in time. But that is something that companies should think about if you really do have those critical roles, is start thinking about that in that way of like, how can we make an argument that this falls under that national interest exemption? Because that'll be the path to go.
Like a true HR thinker, right? Where's the loophole? How can I work with the loophole?
Hey, if you're not cheating, you're not trying, right? No.
There's always exemptions. There's always, if not this, then
Yeah,
this. And
yeah, yeah. But yeah, it's like your kids. Like I feel like when we were, my kids do the same thing. My mom didn't say this. You know what I mean? We can do that part.
technically, you did not say
You didn't
this.
say that. Yeah.
So, yeah.
And my
You
kids
can
are always
say
like
I
that.
couldn't.
But
Yeah.
can I maybe ask you, Nicole, to put your sort of employee relations hat on? Like, what would you suggest HR leaders say? Like, how do they communicate this to the H1B workers? Because I mean, you're largely tethered together once you get into that H1B relationship. At least for the employee, they're
Yeah.
kind of stuck with that employer,
Yeah.
in one way or the other. Like, how would you communicate this right now?
I mean, I think from the employee relations perspective, I think, you know, embracing the uncertainty
Hmm.
and acknowledging the stress and,
Yeah,
just everything that comes, what that brings to that worker. And I think, offering to be supportive to that worker, even just acknowledging that, like, this is such an uncertain time. We don't know what's happening. This is
yeah,
hugely stressful and it's a huge impact to these workers' lives. And if you've got, employee assistance programs, definitely be connecting those workers to those programs, dig into the whatever you've got in your employee wellness sort of bundle to offer support to these
hmm,
workers as well. For ones that are already here, there's a little bit more certainty, but there's still so much uncertainty. So I think right now, just being, just acknowledging the
yeah.
uncertainty and providing whatever support
Communicating.
you can, just some sort of communication. I think what feels terrible is the, like, everyone pretending that they don't see the thing when everyone
Yeah,
sees the thing.
I feel
agreed.
like we're coming into, like the year end and performance managements and reviews, and just knowing that most people leave jobs not because of the job itself, but because of their manager or their supervisor.
Yeah,
It feels like maybe there's some sensitivity or some, some empathy that that HR business partners could be clued into around the fact that these workers, it might not just be a difficult relationship issue, but then there's this added stress of, this isn't going well with my manager, my supervisor, and my whole family could end up,
Yeah,
having an issue with being in status in this country because of this relationship. Feels
yeah.
like it would be
yeah,
really onerous if
I
you're the
mean,
employee.
that's an excellent point, and I think an area that, that's something else that employers can be doing is looking at those managers that are managing H1B workers and, asking, are they getting sufficient training to be supportive? Are they sort of in tune with some of these issues? Can we be increasing that manager level training to make sure that, the employment relationship really is a good one and can work out? And that's really to everyone's benefit.
yeah,
It's,
Yeah.
not even just like the worker, but the entire company, because the cost of replacement and all of that is huge as well. So, I think that's a great area that, sort of an alternative area that employers could be investing in to
yeah,
sort of address this issue.
yeah.
Um,
I can
yeah,
see
absolutely.
the program and project managers out there panicking that are on these big, big transformations. I used to work for TCS and IBM. I've been on some of those mega deals, and I can't imagine, because a lot of these are built on H1Bs, and if I just can't imagine the stress of all that. But look, Nicole, this has been really, really helpful. Thank you so much for taking the time with us. I'd love to just sort of ask you one final thing of really, like, what you guys are obviously keeping your eye on this, I'm sure.
Yeah.
What are you kind of expecting, and what do you think are? I'd love to know, like, are there any adjacent sort of challenges that you think might come out of this with all the lawsuits and angst here? Are there some sort of other things that might pop up that you're keeping your eye on, in terms of maybe new legislations that may become a problem as well?
Yeah, I mean, here in the US, I don't have anything that comes in mind, but one of the things that I always think about, and now that I have started to think about more and more when I entered the EOR space and with international employment, is in HR, is what will we see other countries do,
Hmm.
particularly in response to this?
Yes.
And so, what you could see, and what I like to keep an eye out for, is perhaps something equally as restrictive somewhere
Hmm.
else that, a country implements. And I think you see that happening
Yeah.
sometimes, of, countries and governments kind of starting to panic and almost, double down on turning inwards. And
Yeah.
so, and I think that just sort of, that stifles innovation,
Yeah.
the global economic development, all of that, investment into various countries when people just put up these protectionist barriers. So that's something that I tend to sort of keep an eye on is what is another country going to do in response to this? And then how does that impact
Yeah.
sort of the broader workforce?
Yeah, I would agree. And are we maybe keeping out the best? Are we not necessarily bringing the best people? We're maybe bringing who can pay for the best people. Kind of, you know what I
Exactly.
mean? It makes me wonder that
Yeah.
too, which
Yeah.
leads to your innovation concern.
Absolutely, because then you're not having, startups typically find, a couple of those key folks and then scale companies, right? And
Yeah.
so like if startups can't get access to that talent and only these really large companies can, what does that mean for US innovation and
Yeah.
competitiveness? And
Yeah.
I tend to think not a good thing.
Yeah. It's going to lean towards the big tech who can afford
Yeah.
to say, I can have anybody I want, whatever the fee is. And it sounds like they're paying it, right? I mean, we've heard some of these AI salaries are crazy. Now, I don't know if they're true or not, but it just shows you the lengths they will go to get the right people. And they have the money to
Absolutely.
do it. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I
Which
think
again
that's
doesn't
exactly
make,
right.
harms competitiveness, I guess, for the little guy or girl, whatever,
Mhm.
the little company. And that's the ones that sometimes are on the edge of innovation. And I think doing things
Yep.
that some of the big companies buy anyway. So,
Here we're talking about kind of the administration fee side of the house, right? We're not even
yeah,
talking about where recruiters, are potentially charging as much to find and fill a position. So you get to the point where you're talking 2 and 3x an
margin.
annual salary to
Yeah.
locate and find somebody. Then like now you really can't afford to have these people
Yeah.
wash out, right?
Agreed.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that, right? And yeah, it just drives the price up on everything because that's going to get passed on to somebody, probably us, the
Yeah.
consumer,
I
right?
feel I feel like the innovative small end of businesses are going to find ways around it. There's so much remote work today, and people are
Yeah,
sourcing things, and working globally around, those restrictions because they don't have the resources.
is
And
it?
there's just a
Yeah.
part of me that believes that small company innovation and entrepreneurial, America entrepreneurial world is gonna actually find it easier to work
Yeah, they'll
with
find a
some
way.
of these
They'll get
things that
creative.
others.
They'll get
Yeah.
Yeah,
creative, and I wonder if that means, I don't know, do you see more independent contractors rather than
Yeah.
yeah,
employees?
Yes,
Do
for
you have
sure,
folks
for
going
sure.
that route?
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, the creator economy has got it. There's a lot of consultants now that maybe wouldn't have been a consultant 5 years ago, 10 years ago, for sure. It's much easier and they can connect to clients anywhere.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
challenge for clients is if you don't know those or, like, have a network, and a source for those, then it's like a shot in the dark. How
yeah.
do you know? How do you
And
know
look, with
who's
remote
really
work, the
qualified and
countries with
not?
the talent will find the work, and the work will, you know what I mean? The talent will find the work eventually, one way or the other.
Yeah.
And things like EOR and things like, other solutions that we have in the market now are
Gig
bringing people together, right?
economy.
Yeah.
Marketplace, skills marketplaces and gig marketplaces are collecting people that have skills that are looking for work. And there's people, looking for that too. So
Yeah. I mean, for a lot of the
they'll
industries,
find each other.
you're fine working in a remote environment, and I think
Yeah.
for those industries, yeah, you sort of change your strategy to employ them. Go where the talent is located and
Yeah.
employ them there, and you can rely on an EOR to sort of do that compliantly for you, so you don't have to think about, oh gosh, how do I implement HR in Germany and
Right.
or in India, or what benefits do
Or
I pay, or
the
anything
flip
of
side of the
those.
coin is too, if I'm not married to it, if I test this market and Romania didn't
Yeah.
work out, we can throttle back on Romania and lean into Poland or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's
Exactly.
the agility that I think people forget about, that you can move fast.
Maybe even talent
Yeah.
acquisition and recruiting becomes less about that and more about just talent skills matchmakers, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes,
there's a whole market
exactly.
making that is, kind of the marketplace for skills and for other
Middleware.
things.
Yes.
They're just middleware, aggregating the talent over to the jobs. Yeah.
Yeah,
A lot
absolutely.
of it is. So,
How
yeah.
fun.
Well, this has been great, Nicole. Thank you so very much for taking
Yeah.
the time. Where can folks connect with you if they maybe have a question or want to reach out or just need to get in touch?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there. If you want to talk to someone about EOR, you can reach out to Globalization Partners or GP. We're at g-p.com. You can chat with someone there, even just to get a sense of like, how does an EOR work? Talk through some of that. So feel free to reach out to, GP through our website, through social media. So that's where we can be found. But thank you so much for having me. This was great conversation, and
Absolutely.
there's so much here. You could go in a million different directions and talk for hours. So this was fantastic.
We probably need to have an update at some point, right? Because I know this is not over. There's no way this is over.
This is definitely not over. This is just the very beginning. So we can do status updates. Exactly.
Yeah, you need to check in maybe like 4 to 6 months or something and see what's going on, see who's winning the talent tariff game, and find out if we're making progress. But again, thank you so much, Nicole, and we'll see everyone very, very soon.